Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're all doing good and well. It's raining very heavily here in London, so you might even be able to hear the rain splashing against my window outside, so apologies if that's the case, although some people find rain sound soothing, so maybe that'll be the case for you guys. Anyway, I'm going to be doing my top 20 albums of the 1990s today, a decade when I was pretty much a child, so I wasn't, it might seem hard to believe, but I wasn't really that into music generally in this decade, so the music I was listening to was just on the radio mostly. I sort of had, some bands that I would be familiar with and quite enjoy. One or two of those have made it onto this list. But this top 20 list that I'm about to do is a bit of a mix. So some of those bands that I was even familiar with back when I was a kid in the 90s, some of them I've discovered, post decade, now like maybe in the last 10 years even. I haven't put anything I think on this list that is a recent discovery, say the last 3 or 4 years. I purposely did that because I think you need to, sometimes give a bit of time to try and make it as honest a list as you possibly can. There are a couple of surprise picks in this list. I would definitely say that may come slightly left field choices amidst the heavier, kind of metal and rock stuff. I just wanted to include those albums because they were influential for me and maybe I have some kind of connection with them, so they still made it onto the list. So without further ado, I'm going to start with my number 20, and at number 20 of this decade, I'm actually going to take a swig of tea as well before it gets cold. Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. Wasn't that a film that came out in the 90s as well, thinking about it? Anyway, number 20, Joe Satriani, The Extremist, 1992. For me, one of Joe's most cohesive instrumental guitar albums. Everything came together really well. It's a really well produced album, beautiful sound, lots of great songs. You got stuff like Friends, The Extremist, Summer Song, We've Been in Blue Sky Happiness, classic Motorcycle Driver as well. It just has such a kind of highway, great, windows down, driving along, great feel to this album. It's fantastic stuff by Satch. Next on my list at number 19 is Foo Fighters the Colour and the Shape from 1997. Probably, almost definitely my favourite Foo Fighters album that they've ever done, still to this day. The Colour and the Shape, I think, it's actually one of the more emotional Foo Fighters album maybe that I've listened to that I can think of. Dave here, I think the songs on here are great. Thinking of a few tracks off the top of my head, like Monkey Wrench, Everlong, My Hero, okay, those are big hits. It's got a song called February Stars, which I really like as well on here. Out of all the Foo Fighters album, the one I definitely revisit the most without question. I do like some of their other stuff, but then I'm not their biggest fan, but this album I can definitely listen to without having any trouble whatsoever. It's a great album. It's made it to number 19. On my albums of the 90s list, number 18 is Iron Maiden's Fear of the Dark, an album which often gets kind of a mixed kind of reception. I personally love it quite a bit. I do recognise that it's not the perfect album though, and certainly not maybe of Iron Maiden's absolute best albums, but for this decade it's one of my favourites. I particularly enjoy Afraid to Shoot Strangers, the title track of course, Judas Be My Guide, I've talked about before on the channel, and Chains of Misery, songs like that will make me really like Fear of the Dark still to this day. Number 17 is Pink Floyd's Division Bell. Bit controversial because there are lots of Pink Floyd fans and Pink Floyd purists that really don't like this album, but I have a bit of emotional connection with this album. I think I didn't discover this album actually properly until the late 2000s, but from then on increasingly enjoyed listening to this. It's very poetic, definitely one of more David Gilmour's kind of heartfelt albums that I've heard from him, and in his singing and solos it's really so perhaps if you're less inclined to the kind of mellower, more emotive kind of Pink Floyd sound, or those kind of emotional solos, you may not like this one as much. And of course it's not one of the heavy concept albums, but I love Division Bell. I think it's a great album. Came out in 1994. Still love it. Number 16, Dream Theater's Awake, another album from 94. I didn't really know, obviously, Dream Theater, like I say, a lot of these bands wasn't really listening to much in the 90s, if at all. Dream Theater were a band I came across again in the 2000s after I kind of got more into heavy metal. And Awake was the album that probably stayed with me the longest of the albums I discovered from them early on. Probably Shadows Lifting Off a Dream is one of the reasons why I really like this album, because I think James Debris on this album just sounds out of this world, particularly on that song, and so I really connect with Awake from Dream Theater from 1994. Number 15 on my list is it's not another 94, apologies, 1990 album from the thrash metal band Testament, and it's Souls of Black. Really, really great hooks and so much to enjoy from this album from Testament, which was just as, like, for me, they went slightly astray maybe after this album, but Souls of Black for me is a classic Testament album, and I won't hear anything said otherwise. I absolutely adore Souls of Black. The title track, The Legacy, possibly an all-time favourite, slightly ballady kind of almost track, but it's just really powerful, that song. You've got other great tracks like Falling Fast, Facing the Sky. Really, for me, it's an outstanding thrash album, and one of those albums that makes you wonder why Testament aren't spoken of in the same breath as bands like, Megadeth, Slayer, Metallica, because I often think they deserve to be. Number 14, getting on to number 14 now. Slightly different kind of pick here from the albums I think I've done so far, so this will be the first surprise on the list, and that is His and Hers, which is an album by Pulp, kind of alternative pop group from the 90s, very big in the UK at the time certainly, and the album that was actually really big was A Different Class in that decade, but I go back to His and Hers a lot more than I go back to A Different Class, probably because I've heard A Different Class to death. But His and Hers was the album that's actually, it's got some really, really good songs, and Jarvis Cocker's lyrics and everything are always really, really funny and entertaining to read, and to read alone, let alone to listen to. His and Hers is a great, great album, and has tracks on here like Babies, Pink Love, Do You Remember the First Time, and all now very kind of nostalgic sounding tracks, I think, sort of from an era where you really get that sense of nostalgia, and you get it from this album in droves. Number 13 is Slipknot's self-titled album released in 1999, at the end of that decade. So I almost made the mistake of not buying this album off the shelf when I saw it. I can't remember which shop it was that I bought it, because I saw them all in the outfits. They looked more like it was kind of the front cover of a horror film. And I wondered what it was all about. And I thought about it, and I decided to buy it anyway. And I really enjoyed it, and there wasn't much I'd heard like this Slipknot album before I heard it, and it grew and grew on me more and more, to the point that it was one of those gateway albums I mentioned, like Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park, another one of those early albums that I listened to, that really got me more into just music generally, but really into rock and metal. And Slipknot self-titled album was one that blew me away, actually, and I think it's got a really raw tribal sound, and live it sounds amazing. I would say it's got that raw sound that really, I think some of the later albums are more polished and everything, but I just love that really raw tribal sound in this album. Number 12 is Death's Individual Thought Patterns, one of their most, I think, more, when they became a bit more progressive. I could have put any of the other 1990s album onto this list probably. Individual Thought Patterns just edged it for me. What's on display technically here, amazing, and rest in peace Chuck Schuldiner. What an amazing guitarist and everything. Number 11 is the Cranberries. Everybody else is doing it, so why can't we? And this is a bit of a gear change, a bit of a shift in style from Death, but I couldn't leave the Cranberries off on my list of my 20 favourite albums in the 90s. One of the few albums on the list as well that I did know of, kind of at the time, middle kind of 1990s, And the song Linger, ironically, has lingered with me ever since I heard it on the radio. And lots of other great songs on this album as well, particularly the song Sunday. Now, if you know the Cranberries hits but you don't know Sunday, because I don't think that's one of their big hits, it's a really, really great song, and I think that it's another album with that kind of, once you've heard it, or if you certainly heard it when it came out at the time, you have an emotional connection with it. I think it's a great album, and I could not leave it off my list. Cranberries, everybody else is doing it, so I can't leave. Number 10, shift back into kind of more extreme metal suddenly again. Meshuggah's Chaos Sphere from 1998. Very high up, I think, on my Meshuggah ranking list. I can't even remember if it was top or not. I think Obscene was top actually, but this album is really, I think it was my first Meshuggah album. I didn't get it in the 90s. I wouldn't have understood what on earth was going on back then with this music. Meshuggah being Meshuggah, but great album from them. Chaos Sphere. I suppose it's one of the more albums that he kind of feels a bit more memorable as well from their discography. So I really like Chaos Sphere a lot. Number 9 is Fear Factory's Demanufacture. An album I did sort of know of around kind of 2000, 2001, I think. And it is possibly my favourite of theirs, but it could switch around with Obsolete, Demanufacture. Very difficult for me to decide between those two. I've gone with Demanufacture, and Demanufacture comes in at number 9, released in 1995. Number 8, getting through these quickly now, Pearl Jam with their album 10. For some reason, I feel like this album gets quite a lot of hate. I mean, I think it's because it's so popular. But for me, the songwriting is really, really good. There's a lot of classics on here, like Even Flow, Black, Why Go, I think it's Why Go, Garden, Jeremy, Porch. And it's just really, really memorable. Nothing else I've heard in terms of albums from Pearl Jam anyway has, for me, come to this kind of a level of brilliance. And I honestly think this album is really great. It was one of my, an album that I did hear probably in the late 1990s for the first time, and really just thought this is really, really good. This, perhaps the first time I listened to it, I wasn't that into it, but then it grew and grew, and it's never left. It's never left since then. Number 7, a very dark progressive rock album by Marillion from 1994 called Brave. Very dark concept album, pretty heavy listen, as in heavy emotionally. Not the easiest, it's so dark and you've got to kind of be in a certain mood maybe to listen to this one. But I think it was such a great project by Marillion. They really obviously worked hard to produce this. Perhaps the album post-Fish era that I like the best as well, just because I think it is just so, once you understand this album, it is so encapsulating. You just want to listen to the whole thing. You want to shake yourself away and listen to Brave from start to finish, from front to back, because there's a lot of great moments in here. You just have to look out for them almost, because it's such a dark and heavy album, as I say. Number 6 is In Flames with Jester Race, an album I think I've spoken about before on the channel when I was doing an In Flames ranking probably. Just a real sort of, a rip snorter of an album that totally floored me first time I heard it. There's so many great, I think, rhythms and guitar solos in particular. Some of In Flames' best moments are undoubtedly on Jester Race. December Flower, Jester Race, Dead God in Me. Seriously good album. Number 5 is another seriously good album. This one is from Paradise Lost with Draconian Times, which came out in 1995, the year before Jester Race. Kind of doom metal and gothic metal. Real classic band from that kind of era as well. Nick Holmes sounds great. He sounds amazing on this album. His vocals are really clear. I kind of prefer, it sounds, these days his voice, it doesn't quite, for me, project like it once did on this album. It just sounds phenomenal, and that is a reason I think partly why Draconian Times is so good. His voice just sounds incredible on that album. Number 4 is Still Life by Opeth. An album by Opeth that sometimes, I mean, I think it's spoken about a fair bit, but I think it can get lost in their discography a little bit behind all the talk that Blackwater Park, rightfully gets, and albums like Ghost Referees as well. But Still Life should totally be, for me, it's a masterpiece. It should totally be spoken of in the same breath as those other albums like Blackwater Park and Ghost Referees, because it is really just, I think it has my favourite Opeth song on here, and that's called Heads of the Men as well, and that's one reason why it's very high up on my list of favourite Opeth albums, but also why it's so high up on this 1990s list as well. Came out 99, Still Life, Opeth. Number 3 is an album which I discovered very late, so not in the 90s. I didn't even discover this one in the 2000s. This was an album I actually discovered in the sort of mid-2010s. This is Mandy Lion by The Gathering, and it's number 3 on my list. Came out in 95. And there aren't many albums I can think of that spellbound me completely. On the first listen as well, this one I would say, I was just spellbound by this album. It's the word of the day, maybe, spellbound. Annika's voice combined with those kind of really, the synth and the keyboards, sort of creative guitar work as well, with hooks here and there, with really good, interesting guitar solos too. Those big chords, which are very kind of doom metal-y sounding as well, all combined together, and it just, on this album, there's something about it that, to me, is possibly also why, when The Gathering were really strong too. I mean, they had Nighttime Birds, but Mandy Lion for me is the one that I think I prefer the most. I actually remember I think when I first listened to this album, I was just, having an afternoon nap, and I had this album playing in the background. I think the solo from the song Leaves came on, and I was waking up from my nap a bit, and and that solo was as I was waking up, and I just completely just thought, what is this? This sounds just wonderful, and Gathering fan ever since then, which, as I say, wasn't that long ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago now. But the next 2 albums, listened to a long time ago, and they are both classics. They are much loved, so they're not terribly surprising that they are in my top 2 now of the 1990s. Number 2, you could possibly even predict these. You could probably predict what these are going to be. Number 2 is Rust in Peace by Megadeth, released in 1990. I don't need to say anything about this album, right? Most metalheads go on and on about it, and it's justifiably talked about a lot. Dave's best work, you got Marty Friedman killing it, absolutely killing it on this album. It's insanely good, and there's a reason why Rust in Peace is talked about a lot, because it is insanely good. And you can't, I could not see myself not getting hyped listening to Holy War's The Punishment Due. It's just, and that and Five Magics, that's the other one, and the slightly less mentioned or played song from that album. But Rust in Peace, amazing stuff. Number 1, do I really need to say what this is going to be? Probably not. You can probably guess, right? It's Dirt by Alice in Chains from 1992. An album which I kind of discovered at university, actually properly discovered. I knew of Wood, I think, prior to that, and loved that song. And it's this is it's just a great grunge album. Lane Staley sounds amazing, and he's kind of got that very unique voice, really stands out in the music with everything, particularly with the song Wood, but Down in a Hole. There's some really good sort of, stuff like Them Bones, and Rain When I Die. There's really memorable hooks. Cantrell's a genius to my mind with a lot of his contributions on this album too. It's a great album. It's number 1. So there you go. I've made it to the end of my list only after 20 minutes. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do feel free to like and subscribe if you like lists or if you like album reviews, or I do some coverage as well on sci-fi, horror and fantasy from time to time. Anyway, hope you all have great weekends. See you next time. Take care.